Get out of my warehouse. Sir, I work here. Work you. You smell like wet asphalt and failure. Trent Lawson, $2,000 suit, $80,000 SUV, tore the $800 check in 2 clean halves and dropped both pieces into the puddle at Marcus's feet. The paper dissolved slow, dark, spreading oil across the surface. You're nothing but street trash. Marcus looked at the puddle. He looked at Trent. I know. Then he reached into his breast pocket and...
Insane. He just handed a silent genius the exact weapon to destroy his entire livelihood. Watch this.
Insane. He just handed a silent genius the exact weapon to destroy his entire livelihood. Watch this. Marcus was already behind. He knew it. He felt it in the ache of his calves, in the bite of the wind against his face, in the relentless tick of the clock he carried in his chest like a second heartbeat. The rain had started 20 minutes ago. It had not stopped. It had no intention of stopping. October in this city was not a season. It was a punishment. The streets were slick cold and unforgiving, and the gutters ran black with old oil and dead leaves. Marcus pushed harder on the pedals. His neon vest caught the gray light and threw it back, a smear of yellow in a colorless world. His boots, worn at the heel and cracked along the left sole, soaked through within the first block. He did not complain. There was no one to complain to. He turned off Hargrove and cut through the alley behind the public library, shaving 90 seconds off the route he had memorized in his first week. The delivery bag on his back was waterproof. The documents inside were safe. He was not. The rain found every gap in his jacket, every seam, every place the fabric had thinned from too many winters. It ran down the back of his neck in a cold, steady stream. He gritted his teeth and kept moving. He almost missed the old man entirely. The figure appeared at the mouth of the alley, hunched at the waist, scrambling after a scattering of large paper sheets that the wind had caught and lifted and sent skidding across the wet asphalt. The man was old, perhaps 70, perhaps older. He moved with the careful urgency of someone who understood exactly what he stood to lose. His coat was dark, long, and subtly extraordinary. Marcus did not know the word cashmere immediately. He knew the quality. He knew the difference between fabric that draped and fabric that merely hung. The old man's coat draped. Marcus's vest hung. "Sir?" Marcus braked hard. The rear tire skidded. He planted one boot on the ground and dismounted in a single motion. "Sir, I've got them." He did not wait for an answer. He ran. The first sheet had caught on a fire hydrant, flapping violently in the wind. Marcus pinned it with both hands, peeled it free, and pressed it flat against his chest. The second was tumbling end over end toward a storm drain. He got there in 3 steps. The third and fourth had plastered themselves against the base of a parked sedan. He gathered them carefully, smoothing the corners with his thumb. The old man reached him breathless. "Thank you," he said. His voice was quiet, controlled, and precise. The voice of someone who had spent decades choosing words deliberately. "They're blueprints, originals. I should not have had them out in this weather." "No," Marcus agreed without judgment. He held the sheets out. Then he stopped. His eyes had caught something. A number. A calculation printed in the lower right quadrant of the top sheet, partially obscured by a water stain but still legible. He did not mean to read it. He could not help reading it. His brain had been trained to see load equations the way other people saw faces, instantly, involuntarily, and with immediate emotional response. He looked at the figure. He looked at the column it referenced. He looked at the floor designation printed in the margin. Something cold moved through him that had nothing to do with the rain. "May I?" he said. It was not quite a question. The old man studied him for a moment. "Go ahead." Marcus set 4 sheets on the hood of the sedan, holding them down with the flat of one hand. The rain drummed against the paper. He worked fast, tracing the load path from the foundation call-out to the transfer beam on the 14th floor. The math was confident. The math was also wrong. Not wrong the way a typo was wrong. Wrong the way a miscalculation was wrong, the kind that passed through 3 reviews and a final stamp because everyone assumed someone else had checked it. The error was in the distribution coefficient. Someone had applied a standard residential multiplier to a mixed-use commercial floor. The difference was not large on paper. On paper it was 4 decimal places. In steel and concrete under real load over real time, it was a catastrophic underestimation of lateral stress. Marcus reached into his breast pocket. His fingers found the pen before he had consciously decided to use it. It was a cheap ballpoint red ink, the kind that came in a pack of 12 for $2. He clicked it once. He wrote 3 numbers, a corrected coefficient, a revised moment value, and a note of 6 words in the margin: transfer beam spec insufficient, verify before pour. He handed the sheets back. The old man looked at the red ink for a long moment. His expression did not change exactly. Something behind his eyes shifted. "You're a delivery courier," he said. "Yes," Marcus said. "Where did you study?" Marcus paused. The rain fell between them in a steady curtain. His soaked vest dripped onto the sleeve of the old man's coat, a small dark spot spreading on the cashmere. "I have a master's," Marcus said. "Structural engineering, City University class of 2019. The old man looked at him. He looked at the red pen. He looked back at Marcus. "I see," he said. He folded the blueprints carefully, tucking them inside his coat. He reached into his breast pocket and produced a card, plain and cream-colored, and offered it without ceremony. Marcus took it. He did not look at it immediately. He was already calculating how many minutes he had lost and how far the warehouse was and how loudly Trent would make him pay for every single one of them. He slid the card into the same pocket as the red pen. He remounted his bicycle. He did not look back. But Marcus didn't know that 5 minutes of kindness in the rain was about to cost him everything. Marcus arrived at the warehouse at 4:22 p.m. He was 20 minutes late. I knew the number exactly. He had been counting every minute since the alley, pedaling harder than his legs could reasonably sustain, cutting every corner, running 2 yellow lights and arriving anyway at 4:22 p.m. instead of 4:02 p.m. 20 minutes. In another life, in another job, 20 minutes was nothing. It was a coffee running long. It was a meeting starting late. Here in this warehouse under Trent Lawson's management, 20 minutes was a weapon, and Trent was already holding it. Marcus saw him before he dismounted. Trent was standing at the center of the loading dock, not working, not reviewing anything, not doing anything functional at all. He was waiting. His suit was charcoal gray, fine wool, fitted precisely at the shoulder. His shoes were Italian leather, dark brown, and completely clean despite the weather outside. He had his arms crossed and his chin lifted, and the particular expression of a man who had been rehearsing this moment in his head for the last 20 minutes and was deeply satisfied with how it was going to go. The other drivers were already inside. 15 of them arranged along the concrete floor in a loose, uncomfortable cluster near the sorting shelves. They did not look at Marcus when he entered. They looked at their phones at the middle distance at the floor. They knew what was coming. They had learned over time that the safest position in this warehouse during a Trent Lawson correction was invisible. Marcus leaned his bicycle against the wall by the side door. He unclipped the delivery bag from his back and set it on the intake counter. He was calm. His face was neutral, his movements were deliberate, and the only evidence of the last 2 hours was the water still dripping steadily from the hem of his vest and pooling in slow circles on the concrete floor. Trent let the silence build. That was his technique. He had a performer's instinct for timing, and he understood that silence stretched long enough in a room full of witnesses became its own kind of pressure. 4:22, Trent said finally. His voice carried easily across the concrete floor. It was a voice built for carrying. "You want to tell me what 4:22 means, Marcus?" Marcus said nothing. "It means," Trent continued, stepping forward, "that you are 20 minutes late. It means that Mr. Hargrove's documents, which were time-sensitive, which I told you were time-sensitive, arrived 20 minutes outside the delivery window." He paused. He let that land. "It means you have cost this company a client relationship I spent 4 months building." Marcus kept his eyes level and his hands at his sides. The warehouse was very quiet. The only sound was the echo of Trent's leather shoes on the concrete as he paced, a sharp, rhythmic click that bounced off the cinder block walls and came back slightly hollow. "Do you have anything to say?" Trent asked. "There was a situation on Hargrove Street," Marcus said. His voice was even. "I stopped to assist someone. It was necessary." Trent tilted his head. A slow smile moved across his face, deliberate and without warmth. "You stopped." He repeated the words as if tasting something unpleasant. "You stopped. On a timed delivery. To assist someone." The smile held. "That is the single most self-important answer you could have given me, Marcus. Do you understand that you are a courier? You do not stop, you do not assist, you deliver on time without exception because that is the only thing you are here to do. The click of his shoes resumed. He moved in a slow arc, circling slightly, keeping Marcus at the center of the space and the other drivers in his peripheral audience. Marcus tracked him without turning his head. "I've been generous with you," Trent said. His tone shifted, dropping into something more confidential, more intimate, which was somehow worse. "I gave you extra routes when you needed the hours. I looked the other way on the equipment violations because, frankly, Marcus, the state of that bicycle is a liability issue I have been personally absorbing for months." He stopped pacing. He squared himself toward Marcus directly. "And this is what I get. 20 minutes late, a lost client, and an excuse about stopping to help someone on the street." One of the drivers near the shelving unit shifted his weight. The concrete amplified it. Trent glanced in that direction briefly, and the driver went still. "The chairman of the parent company," Trent said, his voice rising slightly, taking on a new register, proud and proprietary, "is visiting this facility today. Today. Arthur Sterling himself is coming through that door to inspect this operation, and I need every single moving part of this dispatch to look, perform, and function at the highest possible standard." He looked at Marcus with an expression that managed to be both dismissive and focused. "You are not that standard. You have never been that standard. And today of all days, I do not have the patience to pretend otherwise." Marcus said nothing. He had learned a long time ago that the correct response to this kind of performance was not argument. Argument gave it oxygen. Silence starved it. He stood in his soaked vest with his cracked boots, leaving faint wet prints on the concrete, and he waited for Trent to finish. Trent was not finished. He was just warming up, and the real humiliation hadn't even started yet. Trent reached into his jacket pocket. He produced a folded check. He held it up between two fingers at shoulder height, the way someone holds something they intend to drop. Marcus recognized the number on it from across the room. $800. 2 weeks of routes of early mornings of frozen fingers and rain-soaked boots and packages delivered to addresses in neighborhoods that the people signing those checks had never visited. $800. It was not a fortune. It was rent. It was his mother's prescription refill. It was the difference between the month working and the month not working. Trent looked at it. Then he looked at Marcus. Then with a single unhurried motion he tore it in half. The sound was small. Paper tearing is always a small sound, but in a concrete warehouse with 15 people holding their breath, it was enormous. It landed in the silence like something structural giving way. Trent tore it again, 4 pieces now. He held them out at arm's length and opened his fingers. The pieces caught the draft from the loading dock and scattered, drifting down in slow, separate arcs toward the puddle of dirty motor oil and rainwater that had collected near the drain at the base of the dock ramp. They landed there, the 4 pieces of Marcus's $800 floating in the black water, already softening at the edges. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. 15 drivers stood along the walls and stared at the concrete floor and said nothing. The silence was not passive. It was active, effortful, a shared decision made by 15 people simultaneously to become temporarily absent. "You're done," Trent said. His voice was flat now, the performance stripped back to its practical core. "Turn in your bag. You're terminated effective right now for chronic tardiness and conduct unbecoming a dispatch representative." He straightened his jacket cuff. "Clean out whatever you left in the break room and get out of my building." Marcus did not move immediately. He looked at the pieces of his check in the puddle. He looked at them with an expression that contained nothing readable, nothing Trent could use, nothing the room could interpret or categorize. Then he crossed the floor slowly and picked them up. He pressed the wet pieces flat between his palms. He folded them carefully and put them in his jacket pocket. He turned toward the door. Trent was already moving. He walked past Marcus without looking at him toward the loading dock, pulling his keys from his jacket as he went. His SUV was parked on the dock apron, a black luxury model, enormous and spotless. Its surface beaded perfectly with rain. He climbed in without ceremony. The engine started with a low, authoritative sound, deep and expensive, the sound of a machine that had never been asked to do anything difficult. Trent put it in reverse. He did not look back. He did not check his mirror with any care. He swung the vehicle backward in a wide, casual arc, and the rear tire caught the front wheel of Marcus's bicycle with a sound that stopped everything in the room. It was not a small sound. It was not ambiguous. It was the sound of aluminum spokes compressing and snapping, of the wheel rim folding inward, of the gear assembly cracking under 5,000 pounds of applied weight. It was the sound of something that could not be repaired on a courier's income. It was the sound of a man's transportation livelihood and independence being destroyed in approximately 1.5 seconds. Trent stopped the SUV. He lowered his window. He looked at the bicycle, now pinned and twisted beneath his tire, the front fork bent at an angle that made the whole frame useless. He looked at it the way someone looks at a parking cone they have accidentally run over, mildly, briefly, without remorse. "You left your equipment in a vehicle lane," he said. "That's a safety violation." He raised his window. He pulled the SUV forward off the wreckage and parked it properly on the apron. Marcus stood in the warehouse doorway. The rain was hitting the dock apron behind him in steady, indifferent sheets. The ruined bicycle lay on the concrete, the front wheel collapsed entirely. The spokes splayed outward like broken fingers. The frame was bent at the fork. The rear derailleur had been knocked loose and hung by a single cable. The duct tape Marcus had used to secure the handlebar grip was still intact. That detail specifically was almost unbearable. He walked to it. He crouched beside it. He gripped the bent frame with both hands, the cold metal and the black grease transferring immediately to his palms. He did not try to straighten it. He knew better than that. He simply held it for a moment, assessing the damage with the same methodical attention he gave to everything, cataloging what was broken, what was salvageable, and what was gone entirely. The answer was, most of it was gone. He stood. He lifted the frame by the top tube and the rear dropout, carrying it the way you carry something that still deserves to be carried with care. He moved it to the wall beside the side door and leaned what remained of it there. He brushed the grease from his palms onto the thighs of his work trousers, which were already soaked and already ruined. The 15 drivers were still there, still silent, still arranged along the walls, still studying everything except Marcus and the bicycle and the black SUV idling on the dock apron. One of them, a younger driver near the shelving unit, had his jaw set very tight and his eyes focused on a point somewhere above the loading dock. The careful expression of someone working very hard not to have a visible reaction. None of them said anything. Not one. Trent climbed out of the SUV and walked back into the warehouse without looking at Marcus. He straightened his jacket. He checked his phone. He moved toward his glass office with the ease of someone who had just completed a routine administrative task. "Clean up your garbage before you leave," he said without turning around. Trent thought he had broken the courier completely, but he had no idea what was rolling down the street toward his warehouse.
Wait, absolutely not. He just backed his luxury SUV over a struggling man's only way to make a living, while a whole room of grown adults just stood there and watched. If that were me, I wouldn't have been able to keep my hands at my sides. Imagine standing in that warehouse, watching someone's life get crushed just to feed a bully's ego. The audacity is sickening.
Marcus stood where Trent had left him. He did not move toward the door. He did not raise his voice. He did not look at the other drivers, did not scan the room for sympathy or solidarity or even simple acknowledgement. He stood on the wet concrete in his soaked boots with grease on his hands and rain still dripping from the hem of his vest, and he was perfectly, completely, terrifyingly still. Trent noticed it from his glass office. He noticed it because he had expected something else. He had expected the slumped shoulders, the wet eyes, the hurried, humiliated exit. He had seen that exit before from other drivers and other corrections, and it was the part he privately found most satisfying. The confirmation that the hierarchy had been properly demonstrated and understood. Marcus was not giving him that. Marcus was standing in the middle of the warehouse floor with the stillness of someone who had already moved past the moment Trent was still living inside. It unsettled him. He would not have admitted that, but it unsettled him. Marcus reached into his jacket pocket. He retrieved the 4 wet pieces of his check and looked at them again briefly in the flat assessing way he looked at everything. He pressed them flatter with his thumb. He folded them once more and returned them to his pocket. Then his hand moved slightly, almost imperceptibly, to his breast pocket. His fingers pressed lightly against the outside of the fabric. A single quiet tap. Confirming. The pen was there. The cheap red ballpoint, the $2 pen from the 12-pack. The pen he had clicked once in a rainy alley over a blueprint that had changed something he did not yet fully understand. It was still there. His hand dropped back to his side. Trent had resumed pacing in his office, visible through the glass, in short, sharp movements, phone pressed to his ear, performing competence for an invisible audience. He moved the way agitated people move when they want to appear busy, fast and purposeless, covering the same ground repeatedly without arriving anywhere. He glanced through the glass at Marcus twice in 60 seconds. The second glance lasted longer than the first. The drivers had begun to disperse quietly, peeling away from the walls in ones and twos, returning to their routes or their end-of-day paperwork, eager to dissolve into normalcy. A few looked at Marcus as they passed, not directly. Sideways briefly, the kind of look that acknowledged without committing. The young driver with the tight jaw moved past him last. He slowed almost imperceptibly as he passed. He did not stop. He did not speak. He kept moving. Marcus watched them go without expression. He understood the silence. He did not blame it exactly. He had been in rooms like this before, rooms where power was displayed publicly, and the cost of objection was personal and immediate, and the path of least damage was to look at your shoes and wait for it to be over. The cold was settling into his hands now. I understood the calculation. He had made versions of it himself in other contexts in other years before he had learned that there was a different kind of stillness available to him. One that was not the stillness of defeat, but the stillness of someone who had already identified the exit and was simply waiting for the correct moment to use it. The grease had dried slightly at the edges, tightening the skin across his knuckles. His left boot had developed a sound, a faint, wet compression with each step, the noise a boot makes when it has failed entirely at its primary function. His shoulders ached from the delivery bag and from the cold and from 2 hours of pushing hard against a headwind he had not been dressed for. None of it showed on his face. He walked to the intake counter and unzipped the delivery bag. He completed the end-of-day log with the same thoroughness he always applied, recording each delivery, each timestamp, each signature. His handwriting was even. His entries were complete. He filed the log in the correct tray. He zipped the bag and set it on the equipment shelf, not dropped, not pushed, set with the same careful regard he had given it every day for 11 months. He retrieved his personal items from the break room. There were not many. A spare rain cover for the bag he no longer had use for. A transit card. A paperback with a cracked spine that he read during the 10-minute window between routes when the warehouse was quiet and Trent was not yet in. He put them in his jacket pockets without ceremony. He returned to the main floor. He looked at the ruined bicycle leaning against the wall by the side door. He stood with it for a moment, the way you stand with something that has served you faithfully and been treated badly through no fault of its own. Then he lifted it again, carried it through the side door, and leaned it against the exterior wall of the building under the narrow overhang where the rain could not reach it any further than it already had. He stood outside in the cold gray afternoon with the rain falling steadily beyond the overhang's edge and the ruined frame beside him and the wet pieces of his check in his pocket and the cheap red pen in his breast pocket tapping lightly against his ribs with each breath. Trent, watching through the glass, saw a broken man refusing to perform his brokenness. It was the most threatening thing he had ever seen, and he could not have explained why. Trent thought his silence meant defeat. He didn't know a trap had already been set. The rain did not ease. It had committed to the afternoon with the same indifference the city committed to everything, fully, without apology, without regard for what it cost the people standing in it. Marcus remained under the narrow overhang beside the loading dock, his back against the warehouse wall, the ruined bicycle leaning at his left shoulder. He was not waiting for anything specific. There was nothing specific to wait for. I had nowhere to be, no route to run, no delivery window counting down in his chest. For the first time in 11 months, the clock had stopped, and the silence it left behind was vast and heavy and very cold. He thought about the rent. The number arrived first, the way the worst numbers always do, before comfort, before reason, before any of the softer thoughts. $1,400, due in 9 days. He had the 804 wet pieces in his pocket, which was not the same as having $800. He had $63 in his bank account and a transit card with 2 days of fare remaining. He had a master's degree in structural engineering from City University class of 2019, which he had not listed on his courier application because he had learned in his first 3 attempts at engineering firm interviews that a resume which overqualified you for the position you were applying for produced a specific kind of rejection, polite, swift, and final, the kind that closed the door more firmly than a flat refusal. His mother's prescription was due at the end of the week. The refill cost $112 without the coverage gap, and they were in the coverage gap. He knew the exact amount because he had called the pharmacy 4 days ago and written the number on the inside cover of the paperback, now in his jacket pocket in the same red pen currently pressing against his ribs. He pressed the back of his head against the wall. The concrete was cold through his wet hair. He looked out at the rain, at the dark surface of the loading dock apron, at the place where the puddles had merged into a single continuous sheet of water that reflected the gray sky back at itself in long, broken strips. He thought about the degree, not with pride, with something closer to grief, the specific grief of a thing that had cost enormously and been rendered useless not by failure, but by circumstance, by timing, by the compounding weight of his mother's illness arriving in the same semester as the hiring freeze, the same year as the market contraction, the same period when every structural engineering firm in the city was running skeleton crews and not interviewing externals, and would not be interviewing externals for the foreseeable future. He had waited. He had taken the courier job as a temporary measure, the way you take a temporary measure, believing completely in its temporariness. 11 months later, he was standing outside a dispatch warehouse with a destroyed bicycle and a torn paycheck and no foreseeable future to point at. The temporary had become the permanent when he wasn't paying attention. He closed his eyes for a moment. Just a moment. Behind them, uninvited, came the load equation from the blueprint, the distribution coefficient, the corrected moment value, the 6 words in red ink in the margin. Transfer beam spec insufficient, verify before pour. He had written them without hesitation, the calculation unfolding in his mind with the clean, certain logic that engineering had always offered him, a language that did not lie, did not perform, did not reward anything except accuracy. It was the only thing he had ever been genuinely deeply good at, and it was the thing he was currently using to write delivery logs and carry packages to addresses he would never live at. He opened his eyes. The sound reached him before the lights did. A deep, low, rhythmic thrum, the sound of large engines idling at low speed, the specific bass resonance of vehicles that were heavy, expensive, and entirely unconcerned with the rain. He felt it in the soles of his boots before he heard it clearly, a vibration in the wet concrete that traveled up through the overhang and into the wall at his back. 3 black SUVs turned into the loading dock approach. They moved in a close, unhurried formation, their tinted windows opaque, their bodies identical and immaculate, each one throwing up a low, even bow wave of rainwater from the flooded apron. They were Cadillac Escalades, long wheelbase, the kind of vehicle that communicated not speed but authority, not urgency but inevitability. They pulled to a stop in a precise diagonal arrangement across the dock apron, engines idling, wipers moving in slow, synchronized arcs. Marcus watched them. He did not move away from the wall. I was cold and tired and holding a ruined bicycle and 3 black SUVs in a dispatch warehouse parking lot could mean many things, none of which he immediately connected to himself. The door of the lead vehicle opened. An assistant stepped out first, young-suited, holding an umbrella that the wind immediately made useless. He held it anyway. Then the passenger emerged and Marcus went very still. The cashmere coat, dark, long, and perfectly draped, beaded with rain at the shoulders, moving with the unhurried weight of someone who did not alter his pace for weather or circumstance or anything else the world chose to put in front of him. The old man from the alley. The man whose blueprints had scattered in the October wind and whose load calculation had been wrong in a way that mattered enormously. He stepped onto the dock apron. He looked at the warehouse entrance. Then he looked left along the overhang and found Marcus standing there with grease on his hands and a broken bicycle at his shoulder. He looked at him for a moment without surprise, as though Marcus's precise location had been confirmed in advance and he was simply verifying the accuracy of the information. He reached into the interior of his coat. He produced the blueprints folded, carefully protected from the rain. He held them at his side and walked unhurried across the wet apron toward the warehouse door. He did not stop at Marcus. He did not speak yet. But as he passed the overhang, he turned his head just slightly and looked at Marcus with an expression that was calm, deliberate, and entirely unreadable. Marcus felt the card in his breast pocket, beside the pen. He had not looked at it yet, not properly. He looked at it now, pulling it from his pocket with 2 fingers, tilting it toward the gray light. The name on it was plain small, without embellishment. Arthur Sterling. Below it, 1 line. Sterling Capital Group. Marcus knew that name. Everyone in the city knew that name. Sterling Capital Group held the development contracts for 4 of the last 6 major commercial towers built in the downtown corridor. They were currently mid-construction on a 50-story mixed-use tower on the waterfront, the largest private development project in the city's recent history. The largest private development project in the city's recent history, which was currently being built from blueprints that contained a catastrophic load-bearing error in the transfer beam specification on the 14th floor. An error that Marcus had corrected, in red ink, with a $2 pen, in an alley, in the rain. He stood under the overhang, holding the card with the rain falling beyond the edge in a straight cold curtain, and felt something shift in his chest. Not hope exactly. Not yet. Something smaller and more durable than hope. A seed of something that had been buried under 11 months of early mornings and frozen fingers and the particular exhaustion of a person using none of their real capacity. It had not died. It had only been waiting for the correct conditions. Hope was suddenly standing right in front of him, but how it would unfold was about to shock everyone inside. Arthur Sterling walked into the warehouse the way buildings are entered by people who own them, without announcement, without adjustment, without the slight hesitation most people display when moving into an unfamiliar space. He simply came through the door, and the room reorganized itself around him. Not because he demanded it, because the room understood instinctively and immediately that something had shifted in the atmosphere the way a space understands a change in pressure before the weather arrives. Trent was out of his glass office in seconds. Marcus, following at a measured distance, watched it happen from the doorway. Trent's transformation was immediate, total, and slightly nauseating. The jaw that had been set hard and contemptuous 2 minutes ago was now loose and eager. The shoulders that had been squared and dominant were now angled forward, deferential, slightly curved inward at the chest, in the unconscious posture of a man making himself smaller for someone larger. His hand came out first, extended, ready the handshake prepared well in advance. "Mr. Sterling," Trent said. His voice carried a warmth it had not contained at any point in the previous hour. "This is an honor. We were expecting your team's call to confirm timing. I want you to know that everything here is running at full operational capacity. I've personally ensured that today's numbers reflect the standard you'd expect from a flagship dispatch location." Arthur Sterling looked at Trent's extended hand. He did not take it. He walked past him. Trent's hand stayed out for 1 additional second, then withdrew. The color in his face shifted slightly, a brief, involuntary deepening at the jaw and throat. He turned and followed, smoothly adjusting his trajectory as though the slight had been a navigational choice rather than a social one. Arthur crossed the warehouse floor in a direct line. He did not look at the sorting shelves, did not examine the equipment racks, did not perform any of the inspection behaviors Trent had been anticipating and preparing for. He walked with the unhurried certainty of someone who knew exactly where he was going, and where he was going was Marcus. Marcus had stepped fully inside the doorway. He stood at the edge of the concrete floor, still in his soaked vest, still with grease drying on his hands, the ruined bicycle now left outside under the overhang. He watched Arthur approach and kept his face neutral and his body still. Arthur stopped in front of him. He reached into his coat and produced the blueprints, unrolled them with both hands, holding them flat at chest height, and looked at Marcus with an expression that was direct, serious, and completely without condescension. "Explain the red ink," Arthur said. The warehouse went quiet. Not the performed quiet of earlier, not the held-breath silence of 15 drivers watching a colleague being publicly destroyed. This was a different silence, sharper, charged. The silence of people who sensed without fully understanding that something significant was occurring and who had stopped moving in order to be present for it. Trent stopped walking. He was 6 feet behind Arthur to the left, and he had no script for this configuration. He looked at the blueprints. He looked at Marcus. He looked at the red ink in the margin of the architectural plans, and his face arranged itself into an expression of careful, watchful confusion. Marcus looked at the blueprints. He looked at the correction he had made 40 minutes ago in a rainy alley with a $2 pen. The red ink was bold against the white paper, 3 numbers and 6 words, stark and certain and exactly right. He reached into his breast pocket. His fingers found the pen. He clicked it once, the same single click, the same cheap mechanism, the same quiet sound it had made in the alley when his brain had recognized the error before the rest of him had decided what to do about it. He held it at his side. "The distribution coefficient on the transfer beam at the 14th floor, Marcus said. His voice was even, unhurried, and carried the flat authority of someone reciting not an opinion but a fact. Whoever ran the load calculation applied a standard residential multiplier to a mixed-use commercial floor. The coefficient is wrong by a factor that looks negligible on paper." He paused. "Not for effect. To be precise. Under full occupancy load, sustained lateral stress, and standard thermal expansion cycles," he continued, "the beam as specified will experience progressive deformation beginning at approximately year 3 to year 5 of operational use. It will not fail suddenly. It will fail slowly in a way that is difficult to detect without targeted inspection. And by the time the deformation becomes visible in the floor above the structural compromise, will already be significant." The silence in the warehouse was absolute. One of the drivers near the shelving unit had stopped pretending to organize anything. He was simply standing, facing Marcus, listening with the focused stillness of someone hearing a language they did not know they understood. "The corrected coefficient," Marcus said, and he stepped forward slightly, holding the pen over the margin without touching the paper, tracing the calculation in the air with the nib. "Gives you a revised moment value that accounts for the actual load category. The beam specification needs to be upgraded before the pour. If the concrete has already been ordered to current spec, the order needs to be revised. If any forming has already been done to that section, it needs to be evaluated before you proceed." He lowered the pen. He looked at Arthur. "That's what the red ink says," Marcus said. Arthur held his gaze for 3 seconds. 4. 5. His expression had not changed throughout. It was the expression of a man running a very fast internal calculation and arriving at a number that surprised him. "Where did you study?" Arthur asked. "City University," Marcus said. "Master's in Structural Engineering, class of 2019. Arthur looked at him for another moment. Then he rolled the blueprints carefully and tucked them back inside his coat. He turned his head and looked for the first time since entering the building directly at Trent Lawson. Trent was pale. Not dramatically, not in the way of someone about to faint, but in the specific draining way of someone whose understanding of the situation is rearranging itself rapidly and not arriving at a comfortable conclusion. His mouth was slightly open. His clipboard, the one he carried as a constant accessory of authority, was held loosely at his side, his grip on it reduced to something close to forgetting. "This man works for you," Arthur said. It was not a question. Trent's mouth closed, then opened. "He did," Trent said carefully. "As of this afternoon, he is no longer with the company. There were performance issues, chronic tardiness conduct. He was late," Arthur said, "because he stopped to correct an error that would have cost me this building." Trent's mouth hung open, but the billionaire was about to deliver a sentence that would shut it forever. Arthur Sterling reached into the interior pocket of his cashmere coat and produced a phone. He did not raise his voice. He did not perform. I made a single call standing in the center of the warehouse floor and spoke 4 sentences to someone on the other end in the same measured, unhurried tone he used for everything. When he finished, he put the phone away. He looked at the room, at the 15 drivers arranged along the walls, at the sorting shelves, at Trent's glass office with its elevated view of the concrete floor below. He took it in without comment, the way you take in a thing you are about to change. 52 million, Arthur said. He was speaking to the room now, not to anyone specifically. His voice carried without effort across the concrete, clean and even. That is the current construction valuation of the Sterling waterfront tower, not including projected revenue over a 30-year operating life, not including the residential units above floor 20, not including the commercial anchor tenants on floors 1 through 6 whose leases are already signed. He paused. 1 beat. A miscalculation of 4 decimal places in a load distribution coefficient would have compromised the transfer beam at floor 14. Not immediately, gradually, over 3 to 5 years in a way that is quiet and invisible until it is neither. He looked at the floor briefly, then back at the room. The man who identified that error was standing in the rain in a delivery vest. He was holding your packages. He was 20 minutes late because he stopped to do it. Trent had not moved. I was standing where Arthur had left him, 6 feet back slightly to the left, holding his clipboard with the reduced grip of a man who had forgotten what the clipboard was for. The color had been leaving his face in stages since Arthur had turned to look at him directly. It had moved through flushed and settled somewhere past pale, past chalky, into a gray that had no warmth in it at all. Arthur turned to face him fully. Your franchise agreement with Sterling Dispatch, Arthur said, operates under a parent licensing structure. The terms include a conduct clause. That clause covers the treatment of contracted workers under your direct management. He reached into his coat again. He produced a single folded document, crisp and cream-colored, and held it at his side without offering it. I had my legal team prepare this document 6 weeks ago after the 3rd formal complaint filed against this location by departed employees. I was waiting for a reason not to use it. He looked at Trent without expression. You did not give me one. You gave me the opposite. He set the document on the nearest sorting shelf. He did not hand it to Trent. He set it down the way you set down something that no longer requires your personal attention. Your franchise license is revoked, Arthur said. Effective today. The location, the equipment, the client contracts, and the operational infrastructure revert to Sterling Dispatch Parent Holdings as of close of business. You have until 6 p.m. to collect your personal belongings. Trent's clipboard hit the concrete. He had not dropped it deliberately. His hand had simply stopped performing its function. The sound it made was sharp and brief, and it echoed once off the cinder block walls, and then the warehouse was silent again. Trent looked at the clipboard on the floor. He looked at it the way you look at something that has just made clear by falling that you were not holding it as tightly as you believed. You can't, Trent said. His voice had lost its architecture. The projection was gone, the timing was gone, all the structural elements he had built his authority on were gone, and what remained was thin and unsteady. This is my location. I built this operation. I have metrics, I have numbers. I have 7 years of performance data that demonstrates. You crushed a man's bicycle, Arthur said, to demonstrate that you could. The sentence landed and stayed. It did not require elaboration. It sat in the center of the room, and the room sat around it. Trent opened his mouth. He closed it. He looked at the document on the sorting shelf. He looked at Marcus. He looked at the 15 drivers along the walls who were no longer looking at their shoes. They were looking at Trent quietly, directly, with the collective expression of people who had been waiting without knowing they were waiting for this precise moment. Arthur walked to Marcus. He stopped in front of him and looked at him with the same directness he had used since the alley, since the blueprint, since the moment the red ink had told him something important about the person holding the pen. The correction you made, Arthur said, requires a qualified structural engineer to formally review and certify the revised specification before we can proceed with that section of the build. I am currently without a site engineer on the waterfront project. The previous holder of that position left 4 weeks ago. He paused. The role is salaried. It includes full benefits. It includes coverage for dependents. He let that land. He knew about the medical bills. His team had been thorough. I would like you to start Monday. Marcus was quiet for a moment, not from hesitation. From the specific stillness of a person absorbing something real after a long period of absorbing nothing but damage. He looked at Arthur. He looked at the red pen still in his hand. He clicked it once, the same single click, quiet and certain, and put it in his breast pocket. Monday, Marcus said. Yes. Arthur reached into his coat one final time and produced a key ring, plain and unadorned, 2 keys on a simple ring. He held it out. Marcus took it. The weight of it was nothing. 2 small keys on a ring. It was also the weight of 11 months and a master's degree and a mother's prescription and $63 in a bank account and a bicycle destroyed to demonstrate a point. Arthur turned back to the room. He found Trent still standing in the same position, diminished, unmoving, the document on the shelf behind him, and the clipboard on the floor at his feet. Clean up your garbage, Arthur said, before you leave. The sentence was quiet. It was not delivered with satisfaction or cruelty or theatrical weight. It was delivered in exactly the same tone Trent had used an hour earlier, flat and final and utterly without regard for how it landed, which was, of course, precisely the point. Trent heard his own words come back to him in another man's voice and understood completely and irreversibly what had been done. The 15 drivers who had stood in silence while Marcus's check was torn and his bicycle was crushed now stood in silence of a different kind. Not complicit silence. Not the silence of people looking at their shoes. The silence of people watching the correct outcome arrive after believing for one long and ugly hour that it would not. Some of them would think about that difference, about the space between those two silences and what they had and had not done to bridge it for a long time afterward. Marcus walked to the side door. He paused with his hand on the frame. He looked back at the warehouse once, at the concrete floor and the sorting shelves and the glass office with its elevated view of everything below it. At the ruined bicycle leaning against the exterior wall under the overhang which had carried him faithfully through 11 months of early mornings and frozen deliveries, and the particular indignity of being capable of more than you were being asked to do. He had one more thing to do. He went outside. He lifted the ruined frame with both hands. He carried it to Arthur's lead escalade and asked the assistant quietly if there was room in the back. There was. He loaded it himself carefully the way he had carried it out of the warehouse with the regard it had earned. He would have it repaired, not because he needed it anymore, because it had not deserved what was done to it. He straightened. He put his hand in his breast pocket. The pen was there, solid and cheap and exactly sufficient. He left it where it was. He walked back inside.
That feeling of watching a loud, unchecked bully lose their entire empire to the quiet person they deemed inferior, that is pure, righteous vindication. If you were in Marcus's shoes, standing in that rain with a ruined bike, would you have been able to stay that calm and let your intellect do the talking? Drop your answer in the comments below. I read every single one. If this story hit you in the chest, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and I'll see you in the next one.